Good evening again. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole for the Village of Cary for May 17th, 2022 to order with roll call, please.
Weinhammer? Here. Dudek?
Here.
Collier?
Here.
Walrath?
Here.
McAlpine? Here. Cavelli? Here.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now moving to the public comments, where the public is invited to make an issue-oriented comment on any matter of public concern not otherwise on the agenda. We have nobody signed in for that. So we'll move right ahead to our first discussion item regarding the regulations for erection of fences and walls within the Village of Cary. Director Simmons, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The item before you this evening is a follow-up to some comments that were made at our last village board meeting earlier this month regarding a proposed fence installation or temporary fence installation, and then the replacement of that with a permanent fence. Within your packet this evening, staff kind of provided an overview of the specific issue that was taking place, or that was part of the discussion, but also provided a copy of our existing fence regulations. The slide that's currently displayed shows the area that specifically the concern was brought up within. The slide is intended to show what the fenceable area is for each property. So where fences can be installed, basically is the red lines that our code allows for. A fence can go up to the front building line of a house that's been established by the construction of a home on the property, and then can go to along a shared interior side lot line or a rear lot line as well. And this neighborhood specifically, as you can see, all the lot lines in this area are specifically shared with an adjacent property. So depending on where a house is situated on a lot, one property may be able to have a fence located further forward than another property due to the established building line for that area. The code allows for a maximum height of 6 feet for a fence for anywhere on a property. We do not have minimum area requirements for fencing, so there's no. This image shows the maximum that each property could fence in. But the code does not establish a minimum that a property would have to establish if they were to install a fence. So if they wanted, a property owner wanted to install a fence of only 2,000 square feet of their property, but they could fence in, 20,000 square feet, the code would allow that. There would be no restriction against that. Likewise, a fence does not have to go along a property line. So these instances, the property owner could install the fences in these areas, but if they wanted to provide a fence specifically within their rear yard and have it set back 10 feet from an adjacent property line, they would be able to do so as well. If you can switch to the next slide. Similar image. This looks at a different area of town. Again, looking at different lot types and street configurations as far as where fences could be installed. As you can see on the left-hand portion of the slide, there are basically 5 homes that front onto Main Street. Is the adjacent roadway to the top of the image. The 2 homes on the left and 2 homes on the right are built further forward, so they could establish fences at the front building line of their home. The property that's in the middle of that slide on the left is set further back, so they have a larger front yard. But where they could establish a fence is essentially at that front line. So they could have fences on either side of their property in front of their home due to the neighbors potentially installing a fence. Likewise, as you can see along South Prairie Street, there are 2 homes that face onto Main Street, which is the top of the image. And depending on the type of how the home that is to their south is oriented, if their side yard is facing adjacent to a front yard for an adjacent property, their fence would have to maintain a minimum setback of 10 feet to that street. However, and as is the case in this location, both of those homes would have to maintain a 10-foot setback along Prairie Street. However, if their exterior side yard were to face the exterior side yard of another property, they could go up to that 1-foot line, basically right off the sidewalk. So depending on the configuration of the lots, there are different areas that our code would restrict where fences could be located within. Specifically in the item that was brought before you this evening, the homeowner was looking to install a fence that would have enclosed about 1,000 square feet of their property. So they could have basically fenced about 3.5% of their total lot area, where the code would have permitted about 80% to be fenced in. The information that you had in the dais this evening, they did receive additional feedback from the property owner that they were not going to go forward with installing the fence in this particular case. But staff is happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the fence regulations as proposed, or as existing, I should say. If you have any questions regarding particular lots as far as how they may be fenced in. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Anybody want to jump in first?
You want to hear from?
I want to see if you guys have any questions first.
I mean, some of my questions are going to kind of pertain to, where we have people that want to talk to us further about it that were brought it before us. I'd like to hear from them, but, I would like to talk about some of the things that I chatted with them about were whether or not whether we should be looking at something to enact something to our ordinance where, you can't have a dog run or a small area that you can see from the street or that is abutting to someone else. Do we want to do something where we're going to address that? I just don't, I'm open for discussion on those type of things to see what people's thoughts are on it. I just look at this as an opportunity to visit this. If this situation has been resolved, I think that's great. But I think it brought something to light that it's worth us discussing a little bit.
Well, it's been resolved for the time being, but I think
Correct.
that we need to, look at things, holistically.
Correct.
This is a perfect example, the slides thank you, Brian, for putting these together. It really shows the diversity of our properties that we have in town. Nothing is a perfect cookie cutter type of a sign. This would, when you look at the sign, where people could actually put their fence, over their fence, it's unbelievable what can happen. Like this one, the third one from the left on there, this house is set back so far, they could really be concealed back there by fencing. And I remember years ago when I was a trustee, we had a similar situation where that we were dealing with corner lots, and that the corner lot can go all the way to the one side, and then we had an issue with it coming with the stop sign, and it was over in the Candlewood neighborhood, and it was quite an issue back then, and they were going to be replacing the fence, and I think these are opportunities now that when they're brought to us that we should really take a look at it with some fresh eyes and see if there's some ways that, we can tweak our ordinances to be more cognizant of, the diverse properties that we have. And we have some residents here that would like to address the committee. And, specifically in their neighborhood, it's so different in there that these are things that I think that we just need to be aware of. I'd like to, if you'd like to come back up, and you had a couple suggestions for us. Again, just for the record, if your name and address, please.
It is a matter of great importance to us, being in the village for 36 years now, in this particular home. So doing a little bit of research on my own on this, some of our neighboring municipalities, they do have rules and regulations as far as animal fences, right, dog runs. And they range from complete no to strict rules and regulations on what you can and cannot put into the property. Some of the things that I have seen that really make sense for the village of Cary moving forward is, and I believe it's Wheeling, and I did not bring my notes, I apologize for that. They strictly forbid a animal run or a dog run between homes. They absolutely say no. It must be in their backyard, not viewable from the street. And which is, again, a really good idea. If you have dogs in there, of course, things in the street, that's their attention. They want to alert their owners to that. I think completely forbidding a dog run or something like that in a village, I'm not completely for that. I mean, I have 2 cats of my own. We've been dog owners in the past. We love them. So my intention here is not to, my intention here is, let's look at the long-term impact on what the use of these areas would actually be, not only to the neighbors, but also to the neighbors. Questions for me?
No, thank you very much. We appreciate your insight on this.
Again, let me express my thanks to the board for your attention.
Sure. You're welcome. We like to take swift action. When things are brought to our attention, we only know what we know when somebody brings them to our attention so that we can look at it. But you bring up a very valid point about dog runs on the side yards. I mean, that's a big deal. That is a big deal, and that's where the neighborly issues are going to come into play. Is that something that we want to look at, to where we rewrite the code to just maybe allow dog runs in the backyard where it's not adjacent to, the side yards here, there's pinched over here. You can see how narrow that is on the one side of the house, and it's right there. So I think that's something that I would consider investigating, if that's something that the board would like to, have Brian take a look, or Director Simmons take a look at it, and maybe any other feedback, physical approximation, certain number of feet off of the property line when it's adjacent to a property. We have to be very careful about this because, like I said, when we opened this up, there are so many diverse properties in our town that it's very difficult to write one clean ordinance to fit. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You got to figure these things out. So I'd be interested to hear what other people's opinions are on this.
So could we go, not change the ordinance, but write in something that would be a case-by-case basis for dog runs, and would that be inspected before? The way you say it, it's so diverse, every property is different, and I agree, side yards are kind of crazy to put a dog run, should be in the rear. But on some properties that may, on some side yards, it might be okay depending on the property, they're so diverse and so
Right.
different, so outline it completely on side properties doesn't seem like the perfect solution, but an inspection beforehand, neighbor feedback, something.
Well, Jake and I were talking about this earlier, about maybe having more neighbor input when somebody wants to put in something in their general proximity to their property. They need to have some sort of a meeting with them saying, this is kind of like what we want to do.
Our dog runs right now, you can put up one without a permit, right? Because it's not considered a permanent fence, or you have to get a permit?
It's a fence.
Yeah, it's a fence. So
No
you,
matter what
so
size it is?
yeah, so the issue in this particular case, there was a temporary fence that was put up first without a permit. So that's where we originally got involved from the village's perspective in the case on that. There's nothing in the code that would limit or restrict a dog run currently. So how you would define it, we don't define it. We don't have a requirement for, is a dog run just 1,000 square feet? Is it 5,000 square feet of a lot? It's really, if somebody wants to put in a fence on their property, that's all we regulate is where a fence can go.
Even so temporary fence is like gardening fence, like 3 feet tall is considered temporary fence and still needed a permit, or is there a different?
We will generally differentiate from that. So if if you have cosmetic fencing for your a planting bed or garden or something that you have that, keeps animals or is there to keep animals out, we won't count that as a fence. But if it's a more permanent installation that requires footings and, whatnot, we regulate where that fencing can go and how tall.
What I'm getting at is dog runs, you can buy them at the garden store, and they're not permanent, you don't have to put them on the chain link, and you can roll them up and stick them in your side yard.
Right.
Is that considered a fence?
Yeah,
The usage.
it's a dog cage versus,
Okay.
pen, or whatever, so, in that case, we would look at kind of what the intent of the code is, and if this area is a little loose, that may need to be cleaned up, certainly can look at that. But generally, we have regulations for accessory structures on property, fences are specific regulations in the code, but if you wanted to call out a dog run or that type of, use as a separate accessory structure on a property, you can potentially develop specific regulations for that and where they could go. Again, it becomes down to if you have a yard or property like this that could potentially be completely fenced in, we would have to look at what the or what the board would want kind of the intent to be, and look at how we would draft it to speak towards every situation that may occur in the village, or whether it's you can't enclose less than 25% of your yard. That way you kind of restrict how much of a fence you can have installed. But then when you have larger properties that may not want to fence in the entire, then you're forcing somebody to get a variation for that.
Attorney Euler, you seemed like you wanted to say something.
I just want to mention that having no standards and leaving it up to staff, it would create some potential problems. First of all, it puts a lot of pressure on the staff to make judgments on individual properties. If we're going to regulate, we do have to have some rational basis for the regulation. So if we differentiated between multiple properties, somebody challenged our decision on a particular property, it essentially can't be arbitrary. There has to be some standard that we're looking to, so we'd have to have some general boundaries for determining how to place the fence. And the other thing that you've heard before, and you've heard on the Plan Commission, those of you that served on the Plan Commission, everybody brings up precedent. So if your neighbor has it and you don't have it, and the staff, for whatever reason, denied it, they're going to raise that as an issue of fairness. It's a tough issue to defend if in some respects it isn't fair or isn't the same. So
Well, what if we enacted regulations and changed the code, we're gonna have to go back to every property and inspect for?
well, I think you started to articulate what you could use, a 25% size limitation, or it can't be viewed to the extent feasible, it can't be viewed from the street. To the extent feasible, it's going to be pushed at least 10% in from each side yard. All your lots are different configurations, so if it's a rectangular lot, you could have different standards. If it's a triangular lot like this, or irregularly shaped, you could have different standards. But at least you have standards that are set out. You provide notice to the property owner who's acquiring the property subject to those regulations, so.
I am in a position here where I think that if we're trying to create something new, then we're putting ourselves and the staff and the attorney, for that matter, in a position of trying to litigate in the future and assume all of these different variances or different situations. And to the mayor's point earlier, we have so many different lot shapes that I don't know that it would be really feasible to come up with a workable solution. But what I have in the back of my mind is if we had the ability to add some sort of language that would include this type of fencing, because it's still fencing. You can call it a dog run, you can call it an animal pen, you can call it, it's still fencing. Some language in there that included that. And then we have the variance process in place for exactly these scenarios. If somebody wants something that doesn't quite adhere to the code that we have in place, they can apply for a variance. So that would be the catch-all to something that is a little different. My fear is trying to rewrite the code to get more expansive, include these different types of structures and how do they fit in and where do they fit in and what about all the lots. We may put ourselves in more of a pickle trying to get it right versus just saying how do we operate within the structure we already have.
Well, to that end, then, excuse me, if we consider a dog pen a fence, then it would fall under the fence controls, right? Maybe we need a subset to further define it as a animal pen or something along those lines versus a perimeter fence. But I do think that if we go that route, which makes sense, you don't have to create a lot of new stuff, that we do incorporate that it can't be seen from the street, that we do incorporate that it has to be, you know, I'm looking at all these pictures and just imagine if this individual went and put it in the very far corner of their lot, wouldn't bother you, but what about the people behind you? So then you have to start to look at the rear yard, side yard setbacks, which I think we can incorporate something along those lines to address that. And then if they're having a fence, they have to get a permit anyway. So if this is considered, that substructure is considered a fence, then they have to go through the process of showing where they're locating it on their property, correct? And then that addresses, I think, Rick, what you were talking about. So I think it's a great idea.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think our intent is always that we don't want something that's going to impede someone's ability to enjoy their home, right? You know, sit in your backyard, you want to do something, you want to at least be in a position that if it's on that side yard and it's butting up to that, I can understand that being a potential problem. You know, on the flip side, as we said with these diverse properties, maybe if we said, I think what Attorney Euler was saying is that if you say, instead of, sometimes you can't say 10 feet off of the yard because some yards are going to be too small for that. So if it's a percentage, 10% off or something like that. But I think that being proactive and trying to come up with something to address this is better than just saying, yeah, we'll just deal with them and one-offs as they come up. I just think we can incorporate something with regards to this that can meet those needs.
And one other piece, Brian pointed out, Director Simmons pointed out in your staff report that you do have a regulation that addresses the animal's conduct itself, if everybody had a chance to look at it. There is no excessive, continuous, or untimely barking allowed, howling, whining, or other noise causing annoyance and discomfort to surrounding neighbors so as to disturb the reasonable use and enjoyment of their property. So there is discretion in the event that the animal is causing significant problems or noise to address that with a nuisance violation. Currently.
Just, I know we're talking about fences and stuff, but just since you addressed the barking situation, is there a time frame that they can bark for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes?
Did you read the article on Aurora?
Yeah, I sent
You
it
did?
to Jay.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Some towns do that. Some towns.
Do we have that specific time
No.
frame?
We don't, you don't have to do that. I think in this case, if Pat were here, I'm not going to speak for Pat, but I think Pat would say they would reasonably enforce the regulation. They might advise the
Absolutely.
owner to stop, that it is causing a problem.
I
Try to
would,
keep the dog inside.
I would say that it would be very similar, you know, in our discussions, we've talked on Industrial Drive on the parking and trying to be, you know, reasonable with that. And I believe that our officers would take the reasonable approach as it comes to the barking dog. Absolutely.
And then after multiple warnings, I think if the owner doesn't comply, that there's a basis for writing a citation.
They would have the ability to write the ticket right there. I mean, would they do that? I don't see that.
But again, I think it's the number of times that they're called out. And that's what we try to get our residents to take action. And we can only do so much unless we know it. It's not just with this, it's with anything else that they have. We're here to serve and protect, and we want to make sure that we're serving, protecting our residents. So we encourage people to call the police. That's what they're to help us enforce our ordinances. You know, it's not always a traffic ticket or an accident or a domestic or whatever. It's these other things that we want to make sure people are falling in line. And we rely on people to utilize our services to try to circumvent this. And I showed them the letter that we got today from the other neighbor, and with her withdrawing her petition for the fence. So that's a good sign to encourage people to be more neighborly and talk through things. And some of the pictures that we saw, thanks to you, they're disturbing. I mean, some of the things that were shown, and like just not cleaning up after your pets. I mean, that seemed to be like excessive. And that is part of our ordinance, that they have to clean up after their pets. And so I think that it comes to just making sure that our community is aware that we have these things on the books, and if they're having an issue, that they need to call us, and we'll help them with the situation. But getting back to the dog, I like the idea of the dog run having some sort of parameters that a resident can come in and look and say, this is what I want to do, this is how it could fit in my yard. And the percentages, like trustee McAlpine has said, rather than 10 feet or 15 feet or 5 feet, it's a percentage off the line. And it can't be visible from the street. It shouldn't be abutting a neighbor's property line. I mean, that would drive me absolutely insane. And I think that it's not, what?
Well, I was just going to say just that, so I'm probably maybe in the minority here, but I would be also in favor of just not allowing them, period, because I think everyone enjoys their yard differently. Somebody may enjoy the side, but somebody may be enjoying the back of the yard. So I guess if we are going to allow something like that, I'd also like to look at other ordinances where there's a potential to revoke it, if that's even possible. I don't know if that's an option. Like if you have too many complaints of not picking up after a dog, and not all the barking, the howling, whatever the case may be, that you can revoke that dog run. To leave us having that out in case, okay, it's in the back, everything seems fine, but then the disturbances are happening for somebody else. And then we're stuck there because they've got this permit.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, if you issue the permit, you could issue it with the conditions that relate to animal behavior in the backyard. You could cite this particular provision or other provisions you might incorporate into the ordinance. That those are conditions to the issuance of the permit.
So you could do it where it's the third complaint from somebody that you could revoke their dog run,
Yes.
basically.
Well, you could do that for the entire fence
Fancy.
then,
Yeah.
right?
It's a nuisance animal.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing worse than having dogs that just incessantly, they bark. I mean, we drive through the community and we're walking and running through the community all the time, and there's dogs barking all the time. And
Well, and those pictures that were sent were disgusting.
Yeah.
Just touching back on what you were saying with the barking again. So when the police are called out, do the dogs still have to be barking when they come? Do they have to show proof of it? Like, let's say somebody lets their dogs out at 5 a.m. every morning, and the owner hops in the shower, and then they bark for the next 15 minutes, and then when the police are able to get there, they let their dogs back in. But it's like a consistent thing. This is not me.
Well,
I'm just asking a question. I'm just
Asking for a friend, yes.
Hypothetically, yes.
So, I mean, in the case, like, how do we handle it in the Village of Cary?
Well, that's a great point, because I'm sure that happens all the time, all the time. But I think that it would be our responsibility to inform that resident that there's been a complaint. And just so you're aware of this, that we're going to monitor this, that your dog is continuously barking and barking and barking. And it's just, it's not tolerated. So I think, again, it's an enforcement thing.
The next time they can use their cell phone
Yeah.
and record it.
Yeah, I'll say from community development's perspective, sometimes we do get involved in those types of complaints where we do have a homeowner that's complaining about the general upkeep of a neighbor's property. We go out there and inspect it, and we don't see a code violation, but we will have a conversation with the property owner that was the complaint against, but also we'll go back and talk to the individual that called to complain and just advise if these are the concerns that were addressed, but there may not be something that we see as a code issue, but at least we try to address the issue from that perspective so they're aware of concerns. And with barking
Again,
dogs,
it's-
those will be sometimes things that we'll bring up of a complaint. These are things that we're experiencing, so we'll advise of, try to, be mindful of it so they're aware of what's occurring.
Right, and it's like we try to get out in front of things. I think it comes it's an education. You have to tell people they may not know, and then, like, for instance, the neighbor was unaware of this, and she's grabbing the bull by the horns and making positive steps to become neighborly and fall in line, and we can appreciate that. That's how we would like everybody to do. But that being said, on this particular case, is there something does this board want staff to look at other options for us for fencing for dog runs? Is that the direction that you guys want to go?
I do.
I agree with Trustee Cavelli with just banning the dog runs.
No, I don't want to do that.
How many dog runs do we have here in Cary?
I have no idea.
There are some properties that are larger, and I'm aware of a few people that do have them, and I don't know that they've caused any problems. I think it's really a matter of I hate to limit things for people to say, you can't do this. I think if you set something up and you have parameters and they don't abide by it and they're not abiding by it and we get nuisance complaints, then you have that opportunity to revoke it. I'd rather give people the leeway to have as much freedom as possible, and then if they can't adhere to that, then taking it away, than just saying, we're not going to do it at all. That's just me.
For the dog runs, if you change the minimum fence requirement, correct? Brian, how much was the minimum that you have to have on your property for a fence? to
We have no minimum currently.
We should set a minimum maybe, then. That eliminates another 30% of your backyard property. Fence.
I think that, again, I'll go back to what the mayor was talking about in the varying lots. We start putting things like that out there, it could become an enforcement issue, it could become a fairness issue. I think that the tack I would like to go is defining what we're talking about within the current ordinances, because this is still a fence. We have fencing ordinances. Let's define what we're talking about. And to the behavior of whatever animal you have in there, that, in my mind, has absolutely nothing to do with the fence. That's a completely separate issue that needs to be dealt with and enforced, and is on a separate. We're lumping two things together because of the scenario that's in front of us, but we really need to separate these two if we're talking about the structure. We need to go back to the fencing, and if we have some definitions in the current ordinances of, if we want to talk about either minimum height or minimum length, or what, where it's placed at in the yard to the behind the house kind of a scenario, that should be incorporated within there. Any behavior, people, animal, or otherwise, is a completely separate issue. So, from my mind, I would just like some definitions of animal enclosures into the fencing ordinance so that we have a next step in developing how we're going to enforce these problems.
I would agree.
I tend to agree with that. You're right, they are three separate issues that we're dealing with. You know, I think the one that I think we have the most control of right now is the fencing thing, that we need to at least have a clear understanding of what this board wants to be a standard in the village.
Wouldn't it make some sense to not necessarily reinvent the wheel and try to get Wheeling's ordinance and maybe some others to compare?
Well, that's funny that you just mentioned, because I was going to see if staff could check with some of our neighboring, like we normally do in a situation like this, see what the Algonquins, the Crystal Lakes, Fox River Grove, and, some of our neighboring closer, up through McHenry, what they're doing and how they handle things like this. I think that would be worth a little bit of investigation before we, implement any changes.
I would agree. I'd like to see what other people are doing. But I would like to at least look at Wheelings if that was someone that you researched and found something. I'd like to at least see someone that has incorporated something like that and what it looks like.
Okay, any other thoughts on this topic? Okay, moving on, our next item is discussing our block party, discussion regarding the adoption of regulations for permitting of neighborhood block parties. Back to Mr. Simmons? Oh, Courtney! I'm going to sit back and enjoy this one here.
You may remember block party regulations were brought up in a committee of the whole meeting in December. So staff has taken your comments and come up with the draft ordinance that was included in the packet. So just a quick reminder of our current regulations. Activities end by 11. We provide 2 barricades, and lost, stolen, or damaged barricades are assessed a $50 fee per barricade. We usually drop them off on the Friday before the block party and pick them up on the Monday. So with the proposed application process, so these slides are from December. The new or changes are in red. So we would still ask residents to submit their application 14 days before the date, but we will allow a secondary date to be included in the event of bad weather, which was one of the issues brought up in December. We have removed the requirement for the 75% homeowners to sign a petition. But we will still, only allow on local residential streets, and we will supply the information to the police department. These regulations stay the same, but I just wanted to give a quick reminder that activities end by 11. They have to follow the village code when it comes to the noise restrictions. So no amplified noise after 10 p.m. We will still provide 2 barricades. There's a photo of the barricade that we provide currently, and we'll continue to do so. And then in the code, we will now have the fee of $50 actually in the code. Currently, it was just on our website. Now we'll have it in the code.
Well, that's only if it's lost, stolen, or damaged.
Yes. Otherwise, no cost for the rental of the barricades. And then the other change here, which was brought up in December, is providing an actual defined fee for litter. So we've gone with what was in the code previously, which is $25 up to $500. We'll still, of course, allow people to request visits from the police department, but we'll just let people know they are not guaranteed. So that's a summary of those regulations. Are there any questions?
I think
Great job.
nice job, Courtney. You hit the nail on the head with all the things that we had, my memory is serving me correctly, what the committee had talked about before. Just one of the things that was brought to us, just as a matter of transparency, that we were asked to provide type 3, is it, barricades, which are the huge barricades, and that would require multiple people to drop off and pick up. And in all the years we've been doing this, we've used them in my neighborhood as well, and they're fine. You have to remember that you have to allow people to access the street. It's not closing it entirely. If there's neighbors that choose not to participate, they need to be able to come and go as they please. And then you're putting in these bigger barricades, and it just becomes more of an issue. We would hope that people that are organizing their block parties would take an active approach into making sure that people are safe and no cars are entering. But this clearly, you put it far enough down the road, people are going to see that there's, and 9 times out of 10, everybody's in the street anyway. So you're going to see what's going on
That
there.
giveaways
So-
the people in the streets.
But thank you, Courtney. I think that this is exactly what the board was looking for, if my memory serves me correct. Does anybody have any other changes or any comments regarding this?
I just have a question. For the additional waiver required to be submitted for extended hours, is that a separate application then? Or is it all encompassed on that application?
That is separate. I think, Brian, if you could speak on that.
Yeah, the code currently allows for exceptions for the loudspeaker and waivers, or loudspeaker section of the code, so generally it's an email to staff, and it's per the discretion of the village administrator to administer that. So if we are to give an extension of that, it's part of their application. They can include that to say they need the hours to 10:30 for a band or something like that to exemplify it.
Okay. Everybody okay to put this new ordinance on the next consent agenda?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Well, that about do it for us tonight. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned at 6:50.